Hello and welcome back to another video in the Complete Web Dev series. First of all, I want to say sorry it's been a couple days since I have posted. I've been a little busy, so the next few videos might be kind of sporadic, but I should get back on track with posting one a day. This video is actually going to conclude our JavaScript chapter, and in the next chapter what we're going to do is we are going to start building our Node.js server on the back end using the JavaScript that we learned in this chapter. But there's a couple key concepts that we haven't really touched on yet, other than some of the real basic stuff that I think I teach you on the way. And I think it's important that we dive a little deeper in JavaScript and understand just a few more concepts before we try to build the API. Also, I want to apologize. I need to have my AC on because it is really hot in here, so excuse the extra noise. Alright, so where to start? Let's start by talking a little bit about something about JavaScript that I haven't talked about yet. And that is that JavaScript is what is known as an asynchronous language. And up to this point, we've been using PHP. Now, PHP is a synchronous language. So what does that really mean? Well, a lot of people like to use the analogy of a waiter serving tables. An example of PHP would be like this. So a customer comes in and sits down. The waiter or server would go to that table and stand there and wait for that table to decide what they want. Once the table decides what they want, the server would then turn and walk and go to the kitchen. The server would then tell the cook what the table wanted. The server would then stand there and wait while the cook prepares the meal, and then once the meal is prepared, the server would take the meal back to the table, wait for them to eat. Then when they eat, the server would give them the bill. Once they pay, it would then go ring them out, and then and only then would the server go and take on another table. Now that is exactly how PHP works. You have a processor that gets used, so a connection comes in, and PHP will happen from the first line, and it's going to wait till that line is done running. It's going to go to the loop or a function and wait till that's done, and then move on. And it acts just like that. One of the strengths of JavaScript, and the reason that a JavaScript server, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the next video, but the reason a JavaScript server can handle a lot more connections with less resources is because it is an asynchronous language, meaning imagine that same server. So the server would come and ask the people what they want, and then take that back to the kitchen. Now the server knows that the kitchen is going to take a while to cook it. So while the cook is cooking, the server then goes to another table and takes their order. Then goes back to the kitchen, checks on that meal. If it's done, it takes them out to the first table. If not, goes out and gets another table. And so the same server can be handling servicing multiple tables at a time. And that's how JavaScript runs. So it runs asynchronous. If it gets to a place, like let's say a network request, and it knows that network request may take some time, it puts that in a queue, and then it moves on and does some other processing, and then it'll check that queue and say, hey, is there anything that's done in the queue? And it's like, oh yeah, this network request came back, and then it will process that. Okay, so that's one really important thing to understand about JavaScript, because if we don't understand that, what might happen is we write code that we will write code to make a network request, and then right after that we're going to write code to process the results of that network request and then move on. But what might happen is the network request may take a while, and so it's not going to wait, and it's going to move on to the code below that and run that code as if the network request had finished, but the network request hadn't finished. So even though this allows our processor and our computers to be more efficient, we need to keep in mind how to handle that. And we can handle that by forcing code in JavaScript to run synchronously, or we can do something called promises, where we say, hey, this bit of code needs to wait for this other bit of code to complete. Meaning, if I need to print something to the screen after a network request has completed, we need to tell it, hey, wait, and then once this completes, then go back and finish this bit of code. Okay, so that is what we're going to do, an example of that. The other thing we're going to have an example of is an actual network request. We haven't done that yet. And so we're going to build just a very simple sample page that loads Star Wars information from an API that's free and it's open. There's no like API keys. You don't have to sign up for anything. But we're going to be making network requests to this API and getting information about Star Wars and then printing that to the screen. And I'm going to purposely mess up a few times to show you what happens if we don't take in consideration those asynchronous things that JavaScript can do. So without any further ado, I'm going to switch over to my screen here. And let's create a new branch to work on. And I'm going to do get checkout -b. And we'll do v9. Oops, I'm sorry. Get checkout -b v10. And then I'm going to push that and set the upstream of the origin to v10. All right. Once I've done that, I have my branch set up, and let's go over to our JavaScript directory that we've been working on, and let's go ahead and inside the main directory here, let's create a new directory or folder, and let's just call this Swappy. Okay, and inside there, let's create a new file. We'll call that index.html. Let's create another new file called styles.css, and let's create another file called logic.js. And these will be the three files that we work in. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my AC for a moment and see if we can get that thing to be just a little quieter here. We're not going to need much in the way of CSS. Let's just go ahead and do our CSS first. What we're going to do here is create a class called TOC wrapper. And inside here, we're just going to set this to display flex. And then we're going to set it to flex wrap. And then we're going to set it to justify content space between. Actually, let's do space evenly. All right, and then what we're going to do is let's create another class called TOC, and here we're going to add this, give this a border of 1 pixel solid, and we'll just use DDD as a light gray color, and then we're going to give this some padding of 18 pixels. The other thing I want to do is up here in this TOC wrapper, let's give this a gap of 18 pixels just to make sure we don't get these TOC wrappers up against each other. The next thing we're going to do is inside this TOC, we're going to have an H2, and this H2, I want to set the margin to 0, and then we're going to set the margin bottom to 18 pixels, and I think that's all we'll do there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to style our unordered list inside the TOC, and we're just going to say list style none, and then we'll do padding left 0 pixels. All right, so that's all the CSS we're going to do here. Let's go back to the index now and do exclamation tab here if you're in VS Code, and let's give it a title of Swappy. The next thing that I want to do is go ahead and include our CSS. We'll do a link here, and for this we're going to do /styles.css, and then let's go ahead and add in our JavaScript as well. So we'll do script tags here, and for the script tags we're going to do we're going to tell it that the type here is going to be text /JavaScript, and then the source is going to be /logic.ls. all right, so that will bring in our logic.js file. We're not going to need much in the way of HTML, so let's just do that real quick. We're going to need a div with a class of TOC wrapper, and inside that we're going to need a div with a class of TOC, and we'll do an ID of films TOC, and we'll do that ×3. Hit tab. And then I'm going to change the ID of the last two from films to people and planets. So we'll have people, films, and planet TOC. The next thing I'm gonna do is add a couple data attributes here, and I'm gonna say data page is equal to 1, and then we'll do data title, and we'll say films on this one. And actually all of these are going to have a data page of equal to 1, data title of people, data page equal to 1, data title equal to planets. I don't know if we'll get into the pagination or not, likely not, so the data page may not be necessary at all, but this is all of our HTML. The rest of what we're going to do is in the JavaScript. So let's go ahead and switch over to that logic.js file. And let's do something here. Let's create a way for us to get information from our from a network request. Okay, so let's create a function, and we're going to call this function, we're just going to call it get. Okay, and now this get is going to take an endpoint, and the endpoint here that we're going to use is, let's just try out https / swappy.dev / people, and then what we're going to do is we're going to say $page is equal to 1. Okay, and then what we're going to do here, oops, I kind of messed that up. Go ahead and open and close the curly brackets here. And what I meant to do is we're going to say let response equal to, and we're going to use a built-in function called fetch that allows us to do HTTP requests. And I'm going to cut this, and we're going to paste that in right there. And then what we're going to do is we are going to do let data equal to response.json. And then what we're going to do is let's just console log data. All right. Then what we're going to do is underneath this function, let's just go ahead and run our get method like that. So I'm going to save that, and then let's go back here. Let's navigate. You can kind of see a preview of what we're building. Navigate to JavaScript /swappy. And here, go ahead and go here. And I got a problem here. Swappy.dev /API people. Let's save that. And I'll need to right click and empty cache and hard reload. What's going on here? And that is because I have ls here instead of js. Right click, empty cache. All right, so now it says that response.json is not a function. So why is response.json not a function? Well, let's just go ahead and look at what response is. Okay, and save that, and then I'll come over here and right click, and again we got that same error, so let's just for now do that. All right, so now you can see that the response is actually a promise, and we can look at the promise state and it's fulfilled. So what is a promise? Well, fetch is going to return a promise by default, okay? So the fetch function that we use is built into the browser, and that is designed to return a promise. Now, you remember when we were talking about the async thing? Well, a promise is simply nothing more than saying, hey, this is going to take a while, and don't move on, or, actually, This may take a while, and what I want to happen is when this fulfills, when this is finished, then I'm going to have a different state, and we can listen to those promises and say, okay, when this is fulfilled, then do this. Okay, so we can actually make some asynchronous stuff into kind of synchronous code. Okay, it's not really synchronous, but that's how it works. So what we're going to do to make that work is all we have to do here is we're going to make this an async function. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do an await. So we'll use the await keyword right before this fetch. And then we'll bring this in here. And now data will not, so okay, I'll explain this in a second, but we're also going to use an await here. And then what we're going to do here is console log data, okay? So what's happening? Well, this fetch is being called, and it's going to have an await, meaning since this is an async function, it's not going to move on to this line until this line is done, okay? And then what's going to happen is once this line this promise has been fulfilled, it's going to then await this. So it's going to run the response.json, which is going to take that response data and turn it into JSON data. Okay, and then we're just going to console log that. So let's go back now and right click and refresh that. And now you can see that we have a JSON object return that has a count. It tells us where our next for pagination and our previous. And this is all returned by Swappy, by the way. And it also gives us results. So we can see here if we're making a response request to people, we're getting back an array with 10 objects in there that have a name, a height, a mass, hair color, skin color. Okay, so this is the JSON response from that endpoint from Swappy. So now we have an asynchronous function that will wait when we call this to finish this line and this line. But instead of console logging data, let's just keep this function, and now let's return data, okay? The next thing that we want to do is we want to make this dynamic. So it's not much good if this function can only make a call to this one endpoint. So what we want to do instead is let's give this some parameters, and the first parameter I want to give this is endpoint. The next parameter I want to give this is page. And by default, we're going to set page equal to 1. Then what we can do is inside of our fetch here, instead of using single quotes, let's use backticks. And then we can use string interpolation here to set our endpoint here. So instead of running this to people, I can instead run this to endpoint. And instead of setting this page equal to 1 here, we can actually run this with our parameter. So now this fetch is dynamic and can be used with the endpoint and the page that's being passed in. By the way, if we go to swappy.dev, you can see the documentation. It's not much, but you can kind of see what happens here, and you could try out some different endpoints, okay? So that's where I got that information from. Alright, so the next thing that I want to do is we don't really just want to run this get like this. Instead, what we want to do is let's get rid of this function call here, and let's create a way for us to run another asynchronous function. So what I'd like to do is when the page loads, I want to call a function for each one of these. We want to run a populate toc. So we want to populate this div. Right now this div is empty, and we're going to populate that with JavaScript once we get data back from the Ajax call. Okay? So the way we're going to do that is let's just create another asynchronous function, and we're going to call this populate toc. And this is going to take a couple things in. First of all, it's going to take an ID, it'll take an endpoint, and it'll take a page. We'll give it some open and closing curly brackets. The next thing that we're going to do here is we are going to get the response from the endpoint. So the first thing we'll do here is we're going to say let response equal, and then we're going to call the get function. And in the get function, we're going to pass the endpoint down and the page, just like this. And then what we want to do here is let's just console log that response. And actually, before we do that, let's do it just like this, okay? And then what I want to do is here we're going to call the function populate toc, and we're going to populate the films toc, and the ID that we're going to pass in here, or the endpoint, is films. Now we can see that on Swappy's website. So if you go here, they have films or people or planets or whatever. So I can actually test it out by doing films like this, and we'll hit request. And now we can see that the films, this is what is going to be responded with. Okay, so now that we know that films will work, let's just give this a page, and we're going to say 1. And let's save that. And now let's right click and refresh. And now you can see that what we have console logged here is a promise. Why is this a promise? Well, it's a promise because remember fetch, this console log is happening before this is fulfilled, before this asynchronous function is fulfilled. So this is actually a promise. So what we want to be able to do here instead is we will type await right before this, and it will let this fulfill and then console log this. So if I save that and we refresh now you can see we get back the results of 6 films from the API. Perfect. So now that we have that, let's go through and let's populate our DOM using DOM manipulation methods that we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to learn them as we go. So the one thing that we can do here is let's just go down to the next thing, and what I want to do is I want to grab this div by the ID. Now remember, we can use document.getID, get element by ID, to do this. So let's do that. Let's say let L for element equal document dot get element by ID, and we're, instead of manually putting in films TOC here, what we're going to do is we're going to pass that ID down from this populate TOC. Once we have that, let's go ahead and let's add the H2 to this element. And the way that we can do that is we're going to create an H2 element with JavaScript. And we could do that, let's call this, we don't need we can use a constant here. Okay, and then here we're going to create a constant, and we'll just call this title L for title element. And what we're going to do here is use a method called document.create element, like this. And what do you want to create? Well, we're going to create an H2. Okay? The next thing that I want to do is I actually want to get the text that needs to be put in here. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say const, and we're going to say title text. And we're going to set that equal to L, so this element, dot dataset dot title. Now what am I getting there exactly? Well, the L in this case is this whole element. The data set is going to be these data dash elements, so these data attributes, and the dot title will be right here, so I can access this. So in this case, the L dot dataset dot title will be films. Okay, so that's the text that's going to come from this element. Okay, so the next thing I can do here is I'm going to say L dot, and then I'm going to add to this element. So I'm going to add a child to this. So we're going to use the append child method that's given to us by JavaScript, and we're going to append the, actually, you know what? First thing we're going to do is we're going to say title element, and we're going to add into that title element inner text, and we're going to set that equal to our title text here. All right, Then what we're going to do is, so what's going to happen is this right here is going to create an empty h2 element. We're going to set the text inside of that equal to whatever we get from here. Then what we're going to do is take that h2 and we're going to plug it into our original element, which is that div, the TOC div. So then we're going to say l.append child, which will add to a child to the element, and we're going to simply pass in the title element. So if I save that now, we go back here and refresh, you can see that once this comes back, okay, when this comes back, now we have films, and if we right click on here and inspect this, this is an h2. So you can see how JavaScript will give us the ability to add, elements with JavaScript. So I could just create this element from thin air using this create element thing. So we're going to use that same concept to take all of our results and print them in an unordered list underneath each one of these sections. And that's going to be fairly easy. So then what we're going to do is let's create an element for our list. So I'm going to say const list, and we're going to say document, that's going to be equal to document.create element. And what am I going to create here? Well, I want to create an unordered list. So we'll just say UL. All right. Then what we're going to do is remember our response up here. If we look at that response, we have inside of here the results. And I want to loop through these results and add in a list item for each one of them. Okay. So what we're going to do here is we are going to say for, and we're going to do a for loop here. And we're going to say, in here, we're going to do let I equal to 0. And then we'll say as long as I is less than our response.results, then we're dot length, then we're gonna loop. And every iteration of the loop, I want to iterate I by 1, so we don't have an infinite loop. Okay, then what we're gonna do is we're gonna create something called a result. And this result is gonna be, we'll set it to a constant, and result is going to be equal to response.results, and then we're going to use an array syntax here and pass I into that. So now if I do console, I'll do console.log, and we'll console log our result. And if I go back and refresh now, and we go to our console, you can see that it loops through and console logs on each iteration of the loop that one result. Okay, so we get 6 in this iteration for the 6 Star Wars films that the API is returning. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, let's create a list item for each one of those. Okay, so let's do a const li is equal to document.create element li. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say if result.has own property title, because what I'd like to do is if it has a title, then we're going to say li.enter text is equal to result.title. Okay, then what we're going to do is at the end of this loop, outside this if statement, we're going to say list, and we want to append the child to the list, and we're going to append the li. So that's going to build up a list item in this unordered list. And so outside of this for each loop, then what we're going to do is take that list and append it to our original element. So all we have to do here is say l.append child. And then what are we going to append? Well, in this case, we want to append list. Okay, so we'll save that now. And if I go back and refresh, now you can see that we get a list. And if I right click on here and inspect, you can see we get an unordered list that we created with JavaScript. And then for each iteration of the results, we are getting a list item that has the titles of the films in there. Now we could do a whole lot of other things, but I thought, that would work out just fine. So to be safe though, let's make sure before we run this populate toc, let's make real sure that the document has loaded already. And so in order to do that, go back to logic.js. And what we're going to do here is at the bottom of the page here, and it doesn't really matter where you put this, but we are going to do a window.add event listener. And the event we're going to listen for is load. So once the DOM is loaded, then we're going to run an anonymous function here. And inside this anonymous function, let's see, how can I do this? You know, we could just call these methods, or we can actually loop through them, which I think I want to do one more. I want to do that just to show you what happens. So let's now go and do the window.add event listener. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab each one of these divs by their ID, by their class rather. So to get all three of these, and then we're going to do something. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add data endpoint to each one of these. And this endpoint is films data endpoint is people data endpoint, and this one is planets. Okay, so now we have the data page, the data title, and all of that. So let's save that, and let's go back here now, and let's just find all of these. So what we can do now is let's set const, and let's do TOCs is equal to, and then we're going to use document dot get element, or yeah, get elements by, and we can do class if we want, by class name. And this class name that we're going to pass in here is TOC. So for every one of these elements here, they have class TOC. We are going to grab those. So what happened? So inside of here now, let's just go ahead and console log TOCs. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to remove this populate TOC call. And let's go now and refresh. So nothing shows up on the screen anymore. But if I console log this, we have an HTML collection that has an array with 3 elements in it. And the 3 elements are these 3 nodes here. And each one of these nodes is the full node. So we can now use this and loop through those. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to loop through each of those, and we're going to call this populate TOC for each one of those. So let's do that. Let's say 4. And what I want to do here is we're going to say let x equal to 0. And as long as x is less than TOC's dot length, then we're going to loop, and we'll say x plus plus to iterate that x variable. All right, so now what I want to do is we want to loop through each one of these. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our page. And we know that page is going to be equal to our, we can say TOCs x, and then we'll say dot dataset dot page. All right, and we're going to use that same thing here. We're going to say const ID is equal to TOCs x dot ID. We'll say const endpoint is equal to TOCs x dot endpoint dot dataset dot endpoint, like that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to populate TOC. Now the TOC will take the ID, it'll take the endpoint, and it will take the page, which we get all from our data attributes that are on the HTML. So now I'm just going to remove this console log. I'll remove this console log. And that should be the only console logs. And then I'm going to save this. And now if we go back and refresh, we got some problems. So let's try to solve those. But we do get the first one. The first one's working. So why is the first one working? Well, let's look at this. So this films works. It looks like people worked. However, nothing printed to the screen. And that's because the people has a name. So Luke Skywalker has a name property instead of a title. So we need to go back to our Populate Toc here. And what we're going to do here is right here where it says if result has own property, we're going to say else if result has own property. And this time we're going to look at name. And then we're going to say l.inner text is equal to result.name. So we'll save that and refresh. Now we have our people. Okay, so we have 10 people. But we got a problem here, and let's see. This problem, syntax error. Let's see if we get any sort of... Okay, we're getting a 404. So let's try that. Let's try planets, because the planets are the one that's not working. So let's double check we don't have any weird spelling errors here. Oh, we do have a spelling error. That's supposed to be endpoint. So we didn't have an endpoint, so that was null. So that's why we're getting the 404. All right, so now you have the planets. The other thing I'm going to do here is let's just set for our styles. Let's set our TOC. Go to styles and let's set that TOC, and let's just set a min width of 250 pixels. Let's save that, right click and empty cache, and there we go. So now from our API call, we're this is pretty cool. So think about what we've done up until this point. We've taken an HTML page with a bunch of empty divs. We had some data that we plugged into the empty divs, but what we've done is we've when the page loads, when the page is finished loading, we find all those empty divs by the TOC. Then what we do is we grab a couple things from the HTML attributes, the data attributes and the ID, and then we're running the Populate Toc. Now Populate Toc is using the fetch API, which is built into our browsers, to make GET request to the swappy.dev/API endpoint, and we are adding our own endpoint here, which happens to be people, pages, and planets, or I mean people, films, and planets. And then what we're doing is we are dynamically creating elements on the page, the H2 elements and the unordered list, and we are building out the HTML and then appending it inside of these divs here that we added. So that, in my opinion, is pretty cool. And if you can understand these concepts with the asynchronous and the await, now let's do something here. Let's pretend that we aren't going to wait. So what I'm going to do here is this Populate Toc. Let's just get rid of the async await nature of this, and let's find out what happens. If I refresh, you see that these all stay empty. We can't read length because nothing's been returned from our response, because what's happening is when this function runs, before this endpoint can run, it is starting this next line of code and finishing all of this before this comes back. Okay, so we need to use a promise there, and the way that we easily do that is to make this function to say, hey, this function needs to run, this is an async function. Okay, so this is an async function, and sometimes we need to await for a promise to be fulfilled before we move on to the rest of the code in that function. So that allows us to ensure that a response comes back before it loops through and builds out these elements and tries to finish appending these child elements. So if I refresh now, you can see that they even came in reverse order that time. So if you look at the network request, sometimes these finish in separate these will finish at different times. And you can kind of see that this planet one seems to be the one that's finishing first each time. But that doesn't always necessarily happen. And sometimes these may take a long time before they will finish. All right, so I hope that makes sense. You know what, one thing I'm going to do here is just to reiterate the async. Let's just add some time to this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create another async function. And this is going to be one called wait. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set, sorry guys, got a phone call coming in. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to wait, and what we're going to do is at the top of this function here, we're going to say await, wait. Okay, so we're going to await this, and then inside here, what we're going to do is we are going to do a set timeout, and inside this set timeout, we're going to add an anonymous function, and I'm going to return true here. And what we're going to do is we're going to wait 2 seconds. All right. So if we do that and we go back here and we refresh, what did I do? This is not waiting. Wait. You know what? Set timeouts don't work like that, so I apologize. Let's see. Yeah, set timeouts don't quite work like that. So that was a bad example. I apologize. I thought I was going to do something slick there, but forget that for now. Just know that sometimes these fetch things, and in fact, right before I got on the video, these were taking like in some cases 23 seconds for some reason to come back, and we don't want our page waiting on all that. And so we can use those async functions to, like, let's say for whatever reason films was going to take 20 seconds and this was only going to take 1 second. Well, I'd want this to load and not make the whole page wait until the films were done loading at 23 seconds. So that is a really big plus for this. All right, guys, if you've enjoyed this video, if you learned something, please comment, like, subscribe. You can support me on Patreon if you'd like, if you are so blessed and able to bless me in that way. I have some pretty cool things that I do for you if you are a member of Patreon, and you can check that out at patreon.com/freeskills. And if you'd like to get some merch, you can go to freeskills.life. But if you support me on Patreon on the middle or top tiers, you will get merch for free. All right, guys. Well, I will see you in the next video, and we're going to get started straight away into the Node.js server, which I'm excited to show you guys. And we're going to use JavaScript to build a backend API. It will be a REST API, and we will use that REST API when we build out our React.js application. All right, well, with that, I will see you guys in the next video. Have a wonderful day.